Elvis pick at Graceland when we were there? You did. Awesome. We made a little pilgrimage to Graceland, which I would drive, well, my mother would drive us past it every Christmas. And I'd say, look, we could go. And she's like, oh, we have to get there. So finally, for me, 40 years later,
Not my dad much.
now it's his good lecture. So if anybody has any burning questions or not so burning questions, I'm happy to chat about that, or I can chat about other things. There's no immediate questions. Yes, ma'am.
You said you were a writer. Have you written other kinds of things? Are you a journalist, or is this like your first?
Yeah, so I was an English major in college, and I studied journalism, and I thought I'd be a newspaper writer or a magazine writer when I grew up, and I couldn't find a job when I graduated in those areas, and I graduated in '94, and I can only imagine how much more challenging it's gotten to be in those areas now, though I know there are jobs. So I got into fundraising, actually, which has kind of been my bread and butter career since I graduated, but always kept writing and did some essays in my 20s, and had a couple of things published, and then started fiction writing in my mid-20s and wrote a really awful first book, which was the quintessential practice novel. Did you have one of those or no? No, you didn't. She just got it down right away. All right, fine. That doesn't make me feel any better. And then when I was about 30, I began to be thinking about Zeke Cooper and wanting to work on it. So, but it was really 8 years of revision work and kind of having and raising 3 kids and working, and so it was never something that I was doing full time. I got a grant in 2007 from the Elizabeth George Foundation, which allowed me to go down to 60% time actually at work so that I could work on the revision for this, which was a huge blessing. Yeah, Elizabeth George, your book's up there. I always am encouraging people. She's the mystery writer. Believing the Lie. It's massive. It must be 600 pages or something. Can't imagine. And I know some people are curious about the title. Luckily, when it finally sold, the publisher really liked the title and didn't want to change it at all. But we had started with, I think the very original title was Evidence of the Journey. Evidence, which I got because back in the day, when you actually got a ticket to go on an airplane, it said on your ticket, this ticket is evidence of the journey. I thought, well, that's so interesting, that you actually, it's telling you that this is evidence of your physical journey from here to there. And I knew the book was about, it was a hero's journey kind of story, somebody trying to put the pieces of their life back together after experiencing a really catastrophic loss. But the titles evolved. We got to Ordinary Hero for Moon Pie Sky, and then, which was not bad, and then The Coopers of Clayton, which some people said sounded like a TV miniseries kind of thing. And then finally, Lost Saints. I was actually sitting in church on All Saints' Day, and our priest gave this homily that started about the saints, and he said, "Are the saints perfect people? No, they persevere, and that's what makes them saints." And I really felt like I had been touched by this tuning fork, and I felt that, Emma stood up and said, "That's it! I think you got it! Oh my God, thank you! Amen," and all of that, because finally, in the book, Zeke and Lillian are so lost at various parts in their life, and they both make, Lillian in particular, really awful, horrible choices that have, in Lillian's case, devastating consequences for their family. But I felt like ultimately they had sacrificed a lot in the name of love and in the name of their families, and that we don't live, I think, in a culture that really holds up people and families that are ordinary families, that are just trying to get by and just trying to do the best that they can. And particularly in Southern stories too, there's not a lot of stories of working class folks in the South, of which there are many, and always have been, and I suspect always will. So that's kind of where the title ended up evolving from. And then once we found it, it seems to have stuck. Yes, ma'am.
How did you, so you said you'd written sort of a first novel that you let go.
It was kind of a lesbian Danielle Steele, which I have been told there is a market for that, but I am not going, we will not see that book.
So how did you know to hold on to this one?
That's a very good
10 years
question.
is a long time.
Yes, it is. I think one of the key qualities of a writer is a stubbornness and persistence. I think I knew that I had tried very hard to get that first one published, and then I dipped my toe into an MFA program, which a lot of writers do now. They go to Masters of Fine Arts programs in fiction writing. And I was auditing a class, and I brought that first novel in, and the teacher said it was my turn to be critiqued, and she said something like, "This reminds me of really bad sitcom writing." And it was really painful, and I hated that teacher so much in that moment. And then, I was sitting in my car, kind of crying, I'm sure, after class, and I was working full time and had, 1 or 2 kids at that point. And then I realized she was right. I realized that, thankfully, my writing had progressed, and that book was no longer redeemable. It wasn't a story that I had learned everything I could from that story, and I needed to let it go. And Ezekiel was just starting to kind of run around in my head and start to bug me. And I knew that this story, maybe initially because it was grounded in my family's history, I knew that there was a lot there. I knew that it was going to be much more challenging to write. I'd written a 5-page short story when I started my first novel. So I wrote, a 300-page first novel, and then this one, it's a 40-year time span, and it goes back and forth between kind of reflections on childhood with the current timeline, and then I have 2 narrators, and I originally had 3 narrators actually, so it was structurally a nightmare to figure out how to tell the story, but I really just fell in love with the characters, and I think I felt like if I worked really, really hard, that it might be worth publishing, that it might have a shot. There are plenty of beautiful books that don't ultimately get published, but I believed in this story, and was getting, I would go to writers' conferences and would get good feedback from people, so I knew that something was going right in the story. Persistence. But I really did almost give up. In 2008, after I got that grant, I thought, and I held it and held it and held it and didn't send it out to anyone until I felt like it was really, really perfect. And then I sent it out, and the world did not think it was perfect, and nobody wanted. I sent to 515 agents, nobody would take it on, and only one person gave me feedback about why they thought. She just said nice things about the writing and the tone, but felt like it was too slow in the beginning, and that she couldn't sell it like it was, but if I chose to revise, that she would be happy to look at it again. Which, for those writers out there, if someone takes the time to give you some notes and says, I would look at this if you choose, and I like the way the agent said, if you choose to revise. So she was saying, this is my opinion, you're the writer, you may think that's a horrible idea, and it's supposed to be super slow in the beginning, and I'll ruin the book if I do it. So I liked her even more by the way she phrased it. But if they say that, they mean it. They don't say that if they don't find something redeeming that's interesting to them. But then I've been working on it for 8 years at that point, and really felt like, oh my gosh, do I really have it in me to go again? Because I had revised it. I'm sure the first chapter was at least 75 variations, at least, and then the whole book at least 4 or 5 times by that point. And I went very downtrodden to a good writing friend of mine who is also a filmmaker, and I said, she'd read an earlier draft, and I said, what do you think? Nobody wants it, and they think it's this, and I should just quit. And she was, what every writer needs is, she said, no, you shouldn't. We can make it work. You just have to make it move in that first part. So I did one more try. But I swore, and I told, when I was able to sign with the agent, you know, a good agent, I think, will most of the time ask you to do revisions before you submit it. And I'm always a little suspicious when friends get agents and they say, oh no, they say it's perfect. And I think, really? Because nobody's perfect. Usually, you know, having somebody who's in the publishing business read it is very helpful, and they usually have some suggestions. But I told her, you know, I'm not changing this until somebody's paying me to change this. I have invested way too much time. And we ended up having my eventual editor say she hadn't made an offer on the book, and she wanted me to change a plot point that happened with one of the secondary characters. And I thought, but she didn't make the offer. So it was one of those things where you think, if I change it, is she gonna make the offer? Do I want to change it? You know, what's going on? And I ended up thinking, not only did the potential editor said that, and then the associate agent very kindly pointed out to me that there were roughly 30 plot points in the last 25 pages of the book, which might be slightly problematic. She was very sweet. She counted them, you know, and I went, oh my gosh. So I chose to do that. And actually that editor ended up making an offer without having seen the change anyway. So it all worked out. And we ended up with 2 offers, which was this, you know, bounty of, you know, after we've gotten, you know, probably 15 publishing rejections as well from publishers as well. So I love hearing Catherine Stockett of The Help, you know, 60 rejections for The Help. That's a lot of rejections. And she just kept sending it out. You know, I think you keep sending it out as long as you feel like it's redeemable, you know, that it's still good. And then sometimes you just have to call the ball and move on to the next one.
Do you know the story of the Red Tent?
No, I don't. I love that book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the lady that wrote that,
Anita Demont,
right? She got so many rejections from that book, so many stacks and stacks, and she was Jewish, and so she decided she would go from one temple to another and try to sell it to the people, the Jews in the temple. And they, you know, it slowly but surely somebody got a hold of it and realized what a really great book it is. And then, of course, it was published.
Wow.
And it was a matter of, you know, she just kept on keeping on. It just...
persistence, really.
Persistence.
I mean, you have to be a decent writer, but it's so easy to get, you know, the Confederacy of Dunces, you know, off the story, right? I mean, but every writer thinks about that. I love Stephen King. Stephen King has a wonderful book on writing. Have you read his book?
I have, and it's the one I always recommend to people.
It's so great, and I love his story. You know, they were living in a mobile home. I don't know if they had 1 or 2 kids. He was a janitor, and his wife, I forget what his wife was doing. I mean, they were just working, trying to feed everybody, and he kept writing, and he kept getting rejections, and he finally had enough. You know, he'd reached his break point, and he took his last manuscript, you know, the last time it had been sent, he took it and threw it in the trash. And unbeknownst to him, his wife took it out of the trash and sent it to another publisher, and that was Carrie. That was the manuscript for Carrie. And, you know, I think we're all so lucky to have these people in our life that say, that believe, you know. In my story, you know, Ezekiel needs some people that save him. Well, it's not just people. The dog saves his life too, in a way. And I think if you're really lucky, you have people or creatures that kind of help bring you back from the brink of despair and giving up, you know. I love, my original life plan had been to, you know, go to college, have a career, have my first book published by 30, get married at, you know, 33, have my first kid at 35, squeeze another one out by 37, And I did completely reverse. I got married at 23, had a baby by 27, 30th birthday came and went, no sign of a book. And then I was, 38, I guess, when I signed with my agent, and I told her, if I hit 40 and this thing is not sold, you're on suicide watch, because this is, and I say that, and I mean it jokingly, but I really wanted to impart to her that it's very important to me. And then it feels like it did sell when I was 38. It just took a long time to finally get published. It was, to me, felt like the longest publication timeline in history. It was 23 months from when they first bought it. It is a long time. They kept saying to me, no, it's not long. And I said, no, it actually is. 12 to 18 months is the usual time frame from when a publisher buys something. But in the, back home in the Bay Area, I've been blessed to have, all three of my daughters have been part of the book launch events, and I've been working on this book for their entire life, and they knew it, and I would leave to go for a week to some conference, or leave to go to the hotel and work on it over weekend, and I can't tell you that it's, it really happened at the right moment, I feel like, because to have them share it and be excited for me, and the first event that I did in the Bay Area, the book's dedicated to them and to my wife. A woman came up with a book to sign, and she had it open to the dedication, and she'd had each of my girls sign underneath their names, which, if I never get another book published, I hope that I do, they'll have that, and they'll remember that. So that's my happy ending, too, for all those writers out there who are wondering, will it ever happen?
But it's not an ending.
What?
It's a beginning. It's not an ending.
Yes, that is very much, But I felt even when I got that grant, I felt like, what, that grant allowed me for a year to work 3 days a week at my regular fundraising job, and then I had 1 day a week to revise the book, and then I had 1 day a week with my youngest baby. So I had baby time. And so I thought, even this is enough. This, even if it never goes, this is a gift. And I think that kind of is one of the tricks to staying sane once you do get published, because there's always somebody who's, they wanted to publish in February because they said it was really quiet and it's a good time for debut authors, and then all these amazing books were published in February. No one here but all of us, and Jocelyn Jackson, who I'm sure all of you know, who's a best-selling, her 5th book comes out in February, and I thought, how are you going to find my little book in the midst of all this? But somehow we're getting out there, and Grove Atlantic has been very generous and kind to the book, so it's been good. Do you have any other writing publication questions, Mike? This is Mike from the Nashville Writers Meetup.
Hello.
Hi.
A group of almost 1,000 folks
Yeah,
here in
1,000
town.
folks.
It's amazing.
It means 1,000 writers.
1,000 writers. I know. Are any of them songwriters, or is that a separate
Actually,
group?
well, there is a separate group, but there are some songwriters who want to become writers.
Oh, perhaps.
Recommend a short story first.
You're right. For the novel.
Before
Yeah.
the novel.
Yeah.
So, well, you've talked about several things that were really good. Now, did you mentioned, did you use writers groups? Were you part of any writers groups?
I did. Instead, when I wrestled with whether or not to do an MFA, because it was just beginning to be a thing that people were doing, and I dipped my toe in, and then I realized, I was married, I had kids, I was working full time, it just was not right for me. So I used writing conferences as a way to get that. So I kind of stalked my favorite writers. So people like Dorothy Allison, Gina and I were talking about earlier, Jane Hamilton, Book of Ruth, Map of the World. These kinds of people, I thought, if I can just go and be in their presence, it will somehow, rub off. And one conference that I really started at was the Santa Barbara Writers Conference, which is now in its 40th year, and I get to be on the first books panel in June, so it's very exciting. I went to that for probably a decade. And I did have a writing group that came out of that. We were all Bay Area people who would drive down to about 5-6 hours down to Santa Barbara and spend a week in beautiful Santa Barbara. And that group, we're still together, and we were a little unusual. We were not a critique, read and critique, share and critique kind of group. We were support, coffee, cocktail, moan and complain kind of group that we all, some were in their own critique groups, but it really was just sharing, the process. And that was very helpful because I was working, many writers are working in jobs completely unrelated to publishing. And so it was the one place where, I could go once a month to kind of get my writing. We are regular people. We are normal. This is a.
So was that a weekend or was that a whole week?
It was just eventually we'll just meet for cocktails or dinner. We meet probably every couple months now. But initially it was, once a month. And then go to one conference a year. That was kind of how I worked it out. And eventually then I would apply for residencies. I realized once I'd done 10 or 12 years of conferences that a residency became, and when my family was growing, peace and quiet was really what I needed to write. So I've gone to one of those. I'd love to go to the Vermont Studio Center, where they give you a room and you just get to write. Yeah.
So now when you got a book contract, did they then assign you an editor? You were talking about an editor.
Yeah, so I got to talk to the two editors that were offering for the book, so I definitely knew. And I was very lucky that both the editors who were interested in the book had been at their houses for a very, very long time, because one of the things that happens a lot in publishing these days is you are assigned an editor, that editor could be fired, laid off, or get another job, and then your book is kind of an orphan because the person who acquires it is the person who's the most excited about, and then it's kind of like, inheriting somebody else's baby. And I know some people do a great job with that, but one of the things I was happy was these were people that are very stable. So the woman that I went with, Elizabeth Schmitz at Grove Atlantic, was #2 at Grove, and so I knew that was, the higher up in the food chain. Grove is a small independent, but the higher up you go, it theoretically feels safer in terms of stability. You're right, you're never safe. But my agent did have that conversation with her to say, so, how rooted are you? And the answer was, oh, no. And she really does have a great job. Grove is a unique house in the world of publishing these days, so it's been a good road. And one of those things is using your instincts to talk to. I've had friends who've gotten agents, and they're so thrilled that somebody's finally interested in their work, and they kind of take the first person that says, yes, your work is great, and they don't enter into it in any kind of normal business fashion, which would be you research them, you the writer, ask them questions. Well, who would you send this to? What's your take on the book? They just, because having a bad agent or a mediocre agent is actually worse than having no agent, because you think the agent is doing things and therefore you don't have to worry about it, when in fact a bad or mediocre one may not even be sending out your work at all. So that's one thing I've encouraged my friends who are trying to find agents or are getting offers, is to really have some confidence in yourself, and to be very careful when they're entering into that initial agreement, because I think it is very easy to feel just thrilled that there's one person in the publishing world that thinks it's fantastic. Well, chances are if there's one person, there's, it's that there are more fish in the sea kind of thing.
So you recommend interviewing agents, actually asking?
Well, once somebody expresses, yes, I'd like to represent you,
Yeah.
then you usually schedule a call with them. And then they might ask you some questions, but then you really need to ask them some too. Not in an aggressive way, but in the way you would interview, if you were going to hire somebody. This is somebody that's, and I didn't know this, I thought they just got 15% from the original advance. Unbeknownst to me, it's 15% forever, for every single check. I never even see a check. It all goes through the agent and comes up, and if you have a great agent, you're happy to pay, it's fantastic. They're taking good care of you in your book. If they're not so great, do you really want to be having them have 15% of your work for forever?
has your book been optioned for a movie?
Has not. We're trying to get a film agent right now. That seems to be the way that people make a nice little chunk of change in the literary world these days. And I've had one of my longest writing friends, a woman by the name of Catherine Ryan Hyde, who's had about 24 books published, and Pay It Forward was one a while ago now that she's most known for, but she's had many, many successful ones after that. And she was really living off the options, because they option it and they have 12 to 18 months to make it. And if they don't make it, they have to buy another option, or you can sell it again. So it's like having this little thing in your back pocket, that you're, and something like 5% of books that get optioned actually get made. So you can really just keep cranking the cash out of that thing. And with three kids to be feeding at home, and now the second one wants piano lessons too, I say, please, it's a quiet book. One of the things I think initially that was hard about getting representation and finding a publisher was, this is a family story, this is one man's journey kind of a story. There's no werewolves, there's no vampires, nothing gets blown up. It's
The Werewolves of Tennessee.
And there's no car chases. I have adultery. I have other things that happen in it. But so it's that kind of one film agent said it's an independent. It would be an independent kind of a film. And of course I've already cast it in my head and all that. But we'll see if it makes it someday. Does anybody else have any questions? Or I'm going to be around to sign. And Andrew, we have Andrew's disc if you would like. It's the bargain price of $10, which is about the least amount you will pay for a great album these days, for sure. Thank you for coming tonight. It's really nice to have someone speak to you. And Andrew's going to be playing tonight. Where are you going to be? The Commodore, what is it called? The
Commodore Grill.
He's doing